Hello, my name is Darren C, and in this video, we'll be talking about poetry on the digital SAT, what it is, and some tips you can use to help solve these questions when you take the test. So, what is poetry? For our purposes, poetry is essentially the expression of an idea or theme through rhythmic and flowery language. Poetry often uses non-literal language in order to express its main idea, and literary tools such as rhyme, symbolism, simile or metaphors, and non-conventional word interpretations are commonly used in poetry. This poetry questions force the reader to think in more metaphorical terms rather than objective, and interpret often archaic language. This essentially covering up of main ideas, plus the fact that a lot of poems are from so far back that the language is often archaic to us, means that poetry questions are often hard to interpret. And while not all of them are, some of them can be hard to some of them can be hard enough to interpret that it could screw your module 1 and ruin your module 2, essentially screwing up your whole English section. So you should be careful when doing these poetry questions, and like I said before, in this video you'll learn some tips that you can use so you don't fumble poetry questions. So let's look at two examples of poetry questions. Starting with the one on the left. The following is an excerpt from the poem "The House Where We Were Wed" by Will M. Carleton. I've been to the old house farm, good wife, where you and I were wed, where the love was born to our two hearts that now lies dead, where a long-kept secret I told you, in the yellow beams of the moon, and we forged our vows out of love's own gold, to be broken so soon, so soon. This is essentially an entire stanza to say that this dude is divorced, and that he's been to the old farmhouse where they were wed before he was divorced. And so you can see here that despite the fact that this stanza can be essentially summarized to I visited the house we were wed in, but we divorced. You can see how poetic language can stretch that to an entire stanza. In addition, looking at the other problem, the following an excerpt from the poem "Apple Blossoms" by Will M. Carleton. Naught within her eyes he read that would tell her mind unto him. Through your light, he after said, quivered swiftly through light and through him, till at last his heart burst free from the prayer and with which 'twas laden, and he said, when wilt thou be mine forevermore, fair maiden? Now see, considering the fact that the dude says this, you can tell that this language is pretty archaic. Luckily, this language is relatively easy to parse. But in addition, the stanza that we care about, which is this one, is also that non-literal language interpretation that you have to take in, because till at last his heart burst free from the prayer with which 'twas laden does not mean his heart exploded, and instead refers to the fact that his heart was essentially contained his feelings for this woman, which he expressed through "one will be down mine forevermore, fair maiden." So those two examples show you that poetry can often show the non-literal and often archaic and flowery nature of poems. So the main part which you should be concerned about: what can be asked about poetry? Poetry questions will most likely include the main purpose of a poem, the purpose of a specific section in a poem, and finding a line in a poem that best demonstrates a claim stated in the section. You can see the first two in the previous two. where number 4 is a best states the main purpose of a text question, while number 5 is a best describes the function of the underlined section question. Those two are often the hardest ones because they actually require you to read the poem. By contrast, for finding a line in the poem that best demonstrates a claim stated in the question, the claim is in normal English, and so you don't need to you don't have to interpret the theme. You know the theme. You just have to find a line to support it, and these lines are off. And you only need to read a sentence of poem for each thing. So because of that, finding a line that best states the claim stated in the question, I consider the easiest poetry question possible. And so, here's some tips in order to help deal with these types of deal with poetry questions. Tip 1: look at the title. The title of the poem is based on the contents of the poem. If you've taken if you've done poetry in English class, your English teacher may have told you to come up with a title after you've written the poem, because the title will be based on what's inside. And so, if you look at the title, that can help you to interpret the themes of and what the poem's talking about. Even if it doesn't, you spent a total of 5 seconds looking at the top question line, and so even if it doesn't really waste much of your time. And so this question on the left is a pretty good example of this. The first line of the poem: "And this place our forefathers made for man." Continuing this in the excerpt, what this place is, without looking at the question, is pretty ambiguous, because it just doesn't state what this place is. However, if you look at the question, you will see that that this excerpt is from the poem "The Dungeon," and so with that, you can reasonably infer that this place refers to the dungeon. And so the fact that this place is most likely referring to a dungeon helps inform what the rest of the poem is talking about, and it can help you find out the answer. Which due to sections such as "Is this the only cure?" and essentially this entire half of the poem, you can see that this poet thinks that the dungeon is not that said dungeon is not great, making people worse off than they were before. And so the theme of this excerpt is dungeons or jails can end up making people worse off than before and cause needless suffering. So, knowing that theme, you can eliminate A because that's not it, and then you can eliminate C because that's also clearly not it, and then you can see B's not correct because prison is not a solution. You may disagree with that, but that's what the answer for this question says. So, prison cannot be a solution. In addition, it doesn't really talk about you can't really say it talks about a common issue, and so because of that, B's wrong. In addition, D more describes criminals and what they do to them, because crime is a problem, but considering again this half of the poem, the author thinks prison is not great. And so, because of the fact that we know it's talking about prison, because we looked here and said that this place refers to a dungeon, which is a form of prison, that helps us interpret that this poem talks about a prison and the problems with prison. And so, because of the help we got from the title, we can we can safely say that D is the best answer for this question. And so that's tip 1. Very simple, very quick, very easy, but may not be effective in all questions. Still, if it helps like it does, if there's a question like this where the title is really informative of what the poem talks about, it's worth the 5 seconds you look at it. So, tip 2 is thematic length and symbolism. Symbolism is one of the most common tools used in poetry, where you use one thing, that's often physical, to represent another thing that's often intangible, the theme of a poem. Themes are also usually elaborated on extensively, given vivid descriptions for the purpose of imagery. This is because themes are the main idea of the poem. Themes are essentially what this poem is trying to say. And so, because of that, themes will come up quite often, and will be described quite a bit in poem questions. And so, if you can identify symbols and what they represent, as well as find out what is being mentioned throughout the poem, that can help you interpret the main idea, and therefore let you answer parts of the question. And so, let's go through this question, which has very heavy symbolism. And so, the first symbol we can see is and we wrap ourselves in sadness, and despair goes thrilling through us, and the darkness gathers round us, with its horrors half unspoken. Considering how the two lines work together, you can reasonably assume that darkness refers to despair. Considering the fact that darkness and despair are often in use together, and so that helps contrast what comes later with the line, with the light of something shining, be it only by a ray. Now, rays are often used for light, because that's just how light works. Light is often described as rays, and so ray referring to light is the opposite of darkness, which refers to despair, and so light must refer to something hopeful. This is corroborated by the fact that the poem is titled "We Hope." So that previous tip from before comes handy again here, where hope can be used to get a general idea of what happens in the poem. And indeed, the entire next stanza is essentially saying how hope sets them free, is setting the thing free from the darkness of despair. And so, because of this, we can see that the symbolism of hope after despair is established by this line, which is then elaborated in the entire next stanza. And so, when we read the question, which choice best describes the function of the line poem text as a whole, we can eliminate A, because hope is the point of hope in this excerpt is that it uplifts us, we. And so, because the entire next stanza is talking about the power of hope, you can't minimize the hope, because again, it takes up half the poem, and it gets rid of the despair, so it doesn't minimize it, because it plays a major role in this poem. And then B, it firmly emphasizes the despair of the writer, it does it doesn't really do that, because like there's no despair being expressed into it. It's just like it's just praying for the light of hope, even if it's only a ray. That's not really that doesn't do a firm good job of expressing despair, and so because of that, out B's out, I mean. And C, it clarifies the despair that was described earlier in the passage. Despair is clarified as darkness, and again, this hope is represented by light, which is the opposite of despair, and is what dispels it. And so, because the line refers to something quite opposite of despair, it's incorrect. Leaving D, it introduces a visual of a hope that would further be built upon the poem as the only answer. Because again, this part introduces light, a ray of light as hope, and then it elaborates on that with our hearts blossom from the dreary mold, and the birds of hope make music with their sweet and cheerful singing. And then, most obviously, our raptured vision beams the light of perfect day, as well as through veils of blackness bursts the sunbeam's glorious shining. This ray of light metaphor is elaborated on through lines such as these. And so, because you are able to identify the symbolism of light as a ray in this poem, you're able to figure out the theme of the poem, which is hope can overcome despair. And so, because you know the theme of the poem is hope overcoming despair, you can eliminate choices that either do the opposite of that, or do something unreal, or do something that doesn't happen or is unrelated. And so that's tip number 2. Figure out symbols and find things that are elaborate, that are talked about a lot, because those things will often represent the themes of the poem. And so, for our final tip of the day, we have how to parse archaic or confusing language. And so, the first thing you should do is look for words that you recognize and piece together a vague idea of what the poem is saying. You can see that in our earlier example poem, where even though the guy talking is speaking in Romeo and Juliet, you can see that words such as mine forever and fair maiden, while mine forever is in a weird format, and fair maiden isn't exactly new either. You can see combined. You can see that the quote is most likely talking about this dude confessing to a girl, wanting her to be his girlfriend and or wife. And so you can discern that this quote is talking about love. And then, because you know it's talking about love, you can see how this part, which this part modifies, works. And so, because you know that have a general idea of this talking about love, you can reasonably infer that it's emotional source, because love is an emotional source often considered to be in the heart. And so because you were able to recognize words that gave you a relative idea of what was happening, you were able to get a relative idea, which you then use to interpret the rest of the poem. And so, that's your first tip for interpreting archaic language. The second is learning various grammatical tools. Unfortunately, the second part is more something you study beforehand rather than a tip you can use during the test. But you should still study but studying is still very important for poetry, because if you read archaic text, if you read a litany of archaic texts, you'll get used to the structure, vocabulary. You'll get used to the structure and vocabulary of them. And so, even though it's not really a tip, reading older poems and learning what they mean can help you interpret the often old poems that the SAT provides. So that's tip number 2, which is study grammatical tools used in poems and read older poems and interpret them to learn how to read that older archaic language. The third tip is just slowing down can make interpretation easier. If you're blazing through 100 reading 240 words per minute, you're not gonna have time to your brain can't process this archaic and weird language fast enough for you to understand it. And so by slowing down, you give your brain more time to interpret the poem and see what's happening. And then finally, you can use the answer choices to inform you what you should be looking for / getting out of the poem. One of the 4 choices has to be right. And so by looking at one of the 4 choices, you can see what you're supposed to be getting out of the poem. These tips can be seen in number 8, where we have to find the function of thank you mid all this mighty sum of things forever speaking, that nothing of itself will ever come, but we must still be seeking. So, first tip, looking for words that you recognize. Forever seeking, nothing of itself will come, we must still be seeking. Most of those words are normal words, but they're interpreted they're put in a way that is pretty hard to understand. But you can see that forever speak, mid all this mighty sum, and mid does not mean mediocre in this context. Instead, mid would be a short form of amid, which would be like among. And so, because you can latch onto this word and interpret what this sentence means. And you can do the same thing for forever, and must we still be. You can do the same thing to forever and start to get a relative idea of the poem. However, that kind of won't help, and so we can use the other thing you can put into effect and use the answer choices to inform you what you should be looking for / getting out of the poem. And so, you can use the answer choices to figure out and interpret you can use the answer choices, read the passage, and think whether or not it makes sense. So, it questions the author's purpose. You can't really say it questions the author's purpose, because we don't know what the author's purpose is. In addition, In addition, the stanza after it doesn't have the doesn't have the doesn't have the author saying something that would be. The second stanza doesn't have the author or questioning his purpose after hearing this question. And so, because of the fact that the author doesn't really question the author's purpose, which we don't know, by the way. A is a decently weak answer. B, ask Matthew a philosophical question. That's essentially what that's essentially what this stanza is doing. All it is a question, which is, yeah, well, I don't know. It's essentially just a question. There's not too much else to it, and so because of the question, B is a pretty good answer, but we'll come back to that after going over C and D. C, it highlights a subject for which the author is passionate. It doesn't. There's no real explanation besides it really doesn't. Like, where in those 4 lines does it talk about that? And so, because of that, you can't see, because it literally does not talk about the author's passion at all. C is incorrect. And D, it explains an earlier statement. If you read the previous 2 statements, there's nothing about them which you could see be elaborated by the 3rd stanza, which is what we care about. Like, this again, it's kind of just a question, and you can't really explain something with a question, because that's not really how questions work. And so, because of the fact that the previous stanzas aren't exactly being explained by the 3rd one, and the fact that it's a question, which are not usually explanative things, D does not seem like a good answer, leaving B, our pretty decent answer, the best choice, and therefore the answer to this question. And so that's parsing archaic and confusing language. Latch on to words that you recognize to get a vague idea, slowing down so that you can interpret it easier, and using the multiple choice to help guide your thinking. And some tips in general. Process of elimination can guide you to the right answer, or drastically improve the odds at which you can guess the correct answer. Normally, your guess will be a 25% chance, but eliminate 1 and you get a 33% chance of guessing correct, and eliminate 2 and that goes to 1/2. So you go from a half, you double your chance of guessing correctly, which is pretty good odds. So process of elimination can be a powerful tool if you use it well. And then don't latch onto an answer that is based only part on the poem excerpt. Read the entire thing to fully understand the content. So, essentially, read the entire thing before you make an answer. The second part may be very different than the first one, but that should just be... You should be doing that without me mentioning it's a tip, because you should get all the information you can before answering anything, really. And then, final tip in general, don't be afraid to skip the question and come back to it later. If you get stuck up on a question, you lose a lot of time. And so, skipping a question will let you get through the questions that you can answer, and when you come back to it, you might be in a different, better headspace to answer that question. And so, here's a practice question, where I'll demonstrate some of the tips I talked I talked about in the previous slides. So first off, the poem is We Wait. So the poem may have something to do with waiting. And so, or if upon the field of war we stand, and sword for mastery we mate, grim death and radiant glory hand in hand, approaching us with silent step we see, and what of them we vow for us must be. Bravely we strive to win renown's estate, and still we wait. We wait. And when we grope within the gloom of age, when our few steps grow feeble and sedate, we cast our eyes back o'er the blotted page. We peer among the pictures of the past. We gaze upon the future, overcast. Our musing with hopes and fears we fright, and still we wait. So, considering the fact that waiting is repeated at the end of every stanza, we can assume that waiting is a pretty big theme of this poem. And so, because of the repetition we see, waiting, we can assume that the main purpose or main idea has something to do with waiting. So, let's go through these options. To illustrate the abeyancy of life, even as death approaches. Now, you might be asking, what does abeyancy mean? Abeyancy essentially means means something along the lines of not functional, which can be interpreted as waiting, which is why A is a pretty good answer. But assume you don't know what abeyancy means because you're a normal human being. Let's go through the other answers and use process of elimination strategies to get a correct answer. B. To force the reader to consider his own fate. If the poem wanted the reader to consider their own fate, it would most likely have something that refers to the reader, something that says you, but there's no reference to the reader. The reader might as well not exist, because the hypothetical speaker in this is talking about himself and whatever we refers to. And so, because the poem doesn't exactly refer to you, the reader, you can't really say it's the answer. C. To illustrate the futility of war. While the first part does talk about war, the second part literally does not refer to war in the slightest. But waiting is referred into the second part, and in addition, both of them talk about death, whether through a violent end or through your body malfunctioning. So the poem in both stanzas talks about waiting and death. Meanwhile, war is only talked about in one, so you can't say it's the main theme or idea of the story. So because war is only referred to half of this poem, you can't say it's a correct answer, eliminating C. D. To explain the purposelessness of life. You can't really say that because it doesn't really talk. You can't say nothing about it explains that life is purposeless. So yeah, D is kind of just it doesn't talk about life being purposeless. It talks about waiting and death, and so because of that, D is wrong, and either through process of elimination or somehow knowing what the fact that abeyancy can also mean patience and waiting, A is the correct answer. And so with this practice session done, that's the end of this video. I'm Darren C. I was happy to teach you.